Well, greetings again. We're going to do another gallery, another case, and hopefully you'll enjoy this one too, being that I really enjoy these kind of birds from the Maritime Provinces and also New England decoys. Pretty much people say this is where some of it started, and I would agree with some of that. I think most of the decoys that we find that were in use probably started in the areas where they had migrated to, which would be off the Susquehanna Flats. You find a lot of birds there that people were making a living killing birds, whereas the people in the Maritimes and New England fed their families, which is the same thing. But you run into birds here in the New England and in the Maritimes that they're very, very big because they were supposed to handle heavy-duty water. And I think probably some of the names that are most uttered when you're talking about birds like that are Joe Lincoln, of which we have a white-winged SCOTER, which is a slat decoy. That decoy itself was made out of various pieces of wood and put together kind of like a North Carolina decoy when they stretched canvas over. Instead, they didn't use wire, they used wooden slats and built a frame, stretched slats around it. Whether they steamed them is something that I don't know. I would imagine it had to have steamed it in some way to be able to bend the form, and then put canvas over it and painted it. The canvas itself would not refract light, so they wouldn't shine, and you would have that beautiful big SCOTER like that would be able to be seen. Some of these guys would hunt with anywhere from 10 to 30, 40 of them at the most. If those of you who read Decoy magazine, there's a beautiful article in there about from Fred Anderson about Gus Wilson, another carver we're going to talk about here. And he talks about rigging out some of these big SCOTERs and EIDERs, in Maine. Of course, we have the Joe Lincoln, the white wing. We have a Joe Lincoln shorebird, this golden plover on the Joe Lincoln style. It epitomizes exactly what the form would be. Most of these birds would be put together as birds that are going to be coming through in early fall, or sometimes they would be seen early spring on the way back north. So that's why you have fleckles on the chest and on the body. Those are immature feathers coming through on the whole thing, on the plumage. There's one here that another plover, a golden plover, that sticks in my mind because Sam Dyke brought that to me way back when. It came in as a gift, and he said, "Do you have eyes for it?" And way back when I worked in one taxidermy studio, my instructor, the man who I worked for, gave me a pair of eyes. And he says, these date from the turn of the century. They were old mammal eyes, and by and large, it was the only pair I had, and I used them in that bird. Put a pair of eyes in it, and they fit. They're perfect. And they're round, little hollow glass balls that fit in that eye socket, which is pretty much how a lot of decoy makers would do things. They would drill a hole, and once the bird was painted, they'd put an eye in it rather than try to fill it. They would go ahead and stick an eye once it was all done, and that would suffice. And consequently, they would fall out. If the pins that they were put in would rust, the eye would fall out, so you would have to replace them eventually. We also have a beautiful Joe Lincoln Canada goose. And I would, if you want something to really enjoy, go on Google and look up Joe Lincoln chopping out a decoy. I mean, the guy the rest of us use hatchets, he used an axe. He didn't mess around. He got a block of wood and off he went. He would cut his white cedar in the fields behind his house, and he would age it in his fields. around his barn, and then he would make decoys. He didn't use a bandsaw. What he used was his axe, and he would chop them and then work them down with spoke shave and draw knife. But it's poetry in motion watching him chop those things, and then finish the heads himself also. So he never drove. He always had a bicycle. He bicycled everywhere. Another one that we have to talk about from New England is SHANG Wheeler. We have a pair of redheads from SHANG Wheeler, which are outstanding in as much as their original paint. They've got some rub lines, which shows that they were used. And there's a lot of combing on those. Very stylized heads on them. You can't mistake them. If you looked at them when they were unpainted, you would be able to tell right away what they were. Oh, that's a pair of redheads. And, you know, his paint just epitomizes what they're supposed to be. Really neat. Right below it is one first person that we spoke of, is Gus Wilson. Gus Wilson was a lighthouse keeper in a number of different lighthouses in central Maine. And this is one of the birds he did. He never really had wood, and he always scavenged wood, whether it be off the beach or other people would give him wood. He would bring him wood and say, well, make me these and make that. You can always tell a lot of his birds too, the heads were inset. He would carve the area, and the head would block in and then be fastened by nails or pegs. The eyes were generally carved, depending on what phase of his career. Some he deep carved them, some he didn't. Some, depending on the recesses, generally the age mark. But you know, these birds that you can see, and finding one like this great blackback gull on the end of the case is odd. Again, it was done as New England. It's got an inset head, which is a boat building method. Inserting wood into a slot that's carved out like that makes it a lot stronger, so that you won't have that head breaking off. If it does break off, you can repair it. That's one nice thing about it. Let's walk on the other side. But I think of New England too. I think of Connecticut, and we're lucky enough to have a shelf of Roswell Bliss decoys, pair of scaup, a white-winged SCOTER, and a long-tailed or old squaw, whatever what you want to call it. And these things are built from the Connecticut River, being that they're narrow-chested and wide-hipped and round bottom, so that they would handle the flow of the river, which is tidal. And interesting bird, very deep, so that they would sink down into the water. So it's interesting to see how they were formed. Different areas have different ideas on how decoys work. And this must have worked, because there's a lot of birds that are done with this same shape. You'll find when you go back and look at some of these different places, you'll find the different names, and they all follow the same style. Then you run into some Nova Scotia birds, which are again built for the Maine, the big water, so that they have a lot of surface area. There's that one, and then there's also a old squaw right aside of it, from Monhegan. Monhegan is a hotbed for finding good decoys, it seems. And that's an interesting bird. A little hole in the back end where they probably stuck a tail feather from a old squaw that they harvested, so that they could, show that it had actually had a long tail. Of course, if the bird got close enough to see it didn't have a tail, it should be in a boat rather than flying. So that's an interesting thing. And then there's an eider alongside of it too, with an inlet head. So you run into a lot of boat building terms in as much as the big wide bottom birds and mortised heads, and they would actually fill in pieces of wood that way, that same way. If it was a bad piece of wood, they'd cut it out, Yankee ingenuity, putting a Dutchman in it, it's called, and they would fix a block of wood. I think I'm going to leave you with this one on the top, the slat goose called a limmer, generally oversized, really big, and it was slats that were put together in 3 sections, a chest, a waist, and then a stern. And these slats were steamed, bent around to form, and nailed fast, and then painted. And then they sat on a board themselves, and they would be anchored as a group. They call it trawl. We put a trawl together of a number of different goose decoys, and it would, they put them in ponds and things of that sort, and areas where the goose would rest on the way south. So it was their way of, you didn't have to use a huge block of wood, you could take small stuff. Laughing straps, slats like that they were laughing a house with, and make decoys. So, how's that?
Fabulous. Thanks, Rich.